Welcome to Spouse Matters, the podcast dedicated to encouraging military spouses. I'm your host, Jen McDonald, and I was a military spouse for 30 years until my husband retired. We lived all around the world, raised 4 kids, and dealt with all the challenges and adventures of military life, just like you. Over the years, I came to believe that we military spouses are only stronger together. So whether you're a new or more seasoned spouse, whatever life is throwing your way, let's talk about it. Hey friends, welcome. I'm so glad to be talking to you today. Today is my last episode for 2023, and we have had some amazing guests on the podcast this fall. And today is no exception. I am speaking with authors Judy Gray and Taylor Kiland, who are together the authors of the book called Unwavering, The Wives Who Fought to Ensure No Man is Left Behind. And it is an incredible book that I really think would make an amazing movie. It is all about military wives during the Vietnam War era who took on the cause of the military men who had been captured or went missing during the Vietnam War. And you have to realize that the fate of POWs and missing men had not ever been a national priority until this time. This changed everything. So if you've ever been in a military function where you see the POW table that is empty and has all the really meaningful things laid out, that stems from these wives and also the priority of bringing home those who have been left behind also comes from these amazing military wives. So I think you'll really enjoy hearing the story of how they researched this book, that some of those wives are still alive today, and how this all came about and a lot of the story behind it. So a couple of things. I recorded this a few months ago, so some of the speaking engagements they mentioned have already passed, unfortunately, but they do have a whole calendar on their website of upcoming events and speaking engagements if you would like to hear more from them. Also, speaking of their website, I misspoke at the very beginning of the interview and did not give the correct website. So it is unwaveringbook.com. Oh, and if you would like to learn more about the book, I will have the book trailer in the show notes on my site. So make sure and visit that because it's pretty incredible. As well, Taylor and Judy are giving away quite a generous offer. They're giving away one signed copy of their book, along with a 45-minute coaching session for new authors who are looking to write a nonfiction book. Together, they have written 25 books. So that is an incredible opportunity. Be looking for that on my Instagram and Facebook in the coming week. Right now, I am posting a giveaway on my Instagram of 5 books from my publisher, W Brand Publishing, including a copy of my book, Spouse Matters, Sharing Strength Through Our Stories. So if you're listening to this right around December 13th to 15th, 2023, take a look at that giveaway. There's lots of amazing giveaways coming up, and especially if you're a book lover, I think you'll really like these. Don't forget that this month, for the month of December, I am offering a 20% off discount code for my 5-day deployment devotional. I know so many of you are going through deployments right now during the holiday season, and so I wanted to make this more available to you on my website, jen-mcdonald.com. Just use the code December23, that's with a capital D, and you'll get a 20% off when you check out. On the last episode, we talked about military moves and deployments during the holidays. That is definitely a very timely topic. So that was episode 112. So I think that is it. I will talk to you next year. I wish you and your family a wonderful holiday season, whether you are together this year or you happen to be separated due to military training, deployments, whatever is going on. I wish you all the best this holiday season. So, hey, everybody. Today, I am so glad to be talking to the authors of a newly released book about a gutsy group of 1960s era military wives, and it's called Unwavering, The Wives Who Fought to Ensure No Man is Left Behind. So here's a little bit about Unwavering. Moving from the sidelines to the frontlines of activism, a small group of military wives defies government rules to leave wartime diplomacy to the professionals. Speaking up about the plight of their missing and captive husbands, they successfully made the fate of their men a national priority in the 1960s. It was a time when a woman could rarely obtain credit, mortgage, or purchase a car without a signature from her husband or father, yet they persevered, demonstrating great fortitude, moxy, and courage. Meticulously researched, Unwavering is a spellbinding page turner. It thrusts the reader into an unfolding drama and captures the women's tentative beginnings and the obstacles they endured during the tumult of a war unfolding on television, in nationwide anti-war protests, the Watergate scandal, and the seismic cultural upheavals taking place in the U.S. at the time. As they take matters into their own hands, they succeed in persuading a U.S. president, Congress, the State Department, and the Pentagon to follow their lead. Simultaneously, they galvanize public support for their cause, creating a national obsession with our missing men. In doing so, they established an enduring tenet of American policy to leave no man behind. But this is not simply a wives' tale. This is the quintessentially American story of how a group of women, once silenced and sidelined, persevered against all odds to change how America fights her wars. Unwavering was written by authors Taylor Kiland and Judy Gray. Taylor Baldwin Kiland has written 2 other books about our nation's POWs. A former naval officer, the 3rd generation in her family to serve in the Navy, Taylor was raised in Coronado, California, and Alexandria, Virginia, where she grew up with many of the Vietnam POW and MIA families. Judy Gray is a former correspondent for the Tampa Tribune who has published 5 books on military topics. She's a retired Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer and the 3rd generation in her family to serve in the military. She has drawn on her fascination with storytelling to craft narratives about innovators and unlikely trailblazers. You can find Unwavering on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Learn more about the book as well as its authors at unwavering.com and connect on social media at Unwavering Book. So, what an amazing book that sounds like. And after that really auspicious introduction and all of the service that you guys have provided, welcome, Judy and Taylor, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, Jen.
Thanks for having us, Jen. Yes.
Yeah, it's great to be talking to you. So before we get into the story behind Unwavering, I would love for each of you to share some of your background in military life. So Judy, if you'd like to go first, I know you're both former military. So first of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you. Well, we are yin and yang on this. I was a reservist for almost 31 years in the Coast Guard and called to active duty for about just under 10 years because of various conflicts and various operations, such as Operation Enduring Freedom. So we know well, both of us, what it's like to be away from home, what it's like to be deployed, how to speak military lingo, what the changes are in your life when you have to choose service over time off, for example, country over family, and try to mesh that together.
Well, what about you, Taylor?
Well, I spent 5 years on active duty in the Navy, but I spent more time as a military kid and grandkid. My grandfather served 40 plus years in the Navy. My father served 23. So both my grandmother and mother were military wives for the majority of their adult lives. And I grew up moving around quite a bit. So I can certainly empathize with military families and the frequent disruptions, long deployments, and many changes. Military families are forced to be resilient, and as a result, they are.
So you've seen it from all sides, it sounds like.
Absolutely, Jen. I wanted to say that, to a woman in our book, we recognized that they saw themselves as serving right along with their husbands. So military spouses were frequently on our minds as we wrote this book.
I love what you said. You said it was a love song to, or love letter to military spouses today. And I totally agree with that. So when we talk about the book, would you like to share some of the main story? We kind of touched on the overall theme of it, but some of the main themes and the story behind it and how you got involved in this. Taylor, you want to go first?
Sure. So, this is really, as you said in the introduction, this is much more than a wives' tale. This is a story about a group of 1960s era women who did what very few women in the 1960s could do. For those of you in the audience, you may not really remember the fact that the 1960s was really much more like the 1950s culturally. There were many restrictions for women. They couldn't get credit. They really, once they got pregnant, most of them were fired from their jobs. It was totally illegal to do so. They still wore white gloves when they went out to lunch and dinner. And for military wives, there were even more restrictions placed on them. They really had to follow the strict pecking order of the military. They couldn't disparage the military or their husbands' careers, or there were consequences. And so against this backdrop, when the Vietnam War began heating up and men started disappearing over the skies of North Vietnam, shot down during the Operation Rolling Thunder, which began in earnest in 1965, and dozens and then hundreds of men and then thousands went missing and were taken captive. The women were initially told to keep quiet, leave the diplomacy to the professionals, but they decided that they lost patience with the government and the government's inaction, and they spoke up and they spoke out, and they really galvanized an entire nation around the plight of their missing and captive men, to the point where the fate of these 1,500 men really overshadowed the tens of thousands who were fighting and dying on the front lines. I mean, in 1972, a Harris poll said that 75% of Americans agreed with the wives that we will not withdraw from Vietnam until every single one of those POWs is home. It became the central negotiating point of the Vietnam War. And so we set out to tell that story as to how a gutsy group of women can really, if they feel strongly about something, don't leave diplomacy to the professionals. Speak up and speak out.
Don't underestimate a military spouse.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Judy, did you have anything to add to that?
No, there are other themes, and their resilience, their organizing, their being true to your own values and staying true, no matter how insurmountable the challenges feel or felt to these women. As Taylor pointed out, the 1960s were very different for women, and the world was changing around these women, and they were pulled by two universes. One was change, and one was the status quo. And they really felt and were told being obedient, being quiet, being sidelined would help their husbands. So taking great risk, some of them writing clandestine letters at the request of some empathetic men who worked at the Pentagon, and they took big risks. And I think that's the lesson, that sometimes you may feel it's not expedient to speak out, but it could be very important in the long run. The other thing that's interesting is all the women in our book are extremely humble and not necessarily imbued with the ability to look back and see how they did, until we started working on the book. And I would say very much in the last few months, they've begun to say, wow, what we did was really important. And I was asked a question recently, are there any statues to these women? And it's because so many people are inspired by what they did. And a few people, men, have said, it inspired me. I had no idea this story existed. And I thought I was an expert on the 1960s or on American history. So reading the untold stories, as you know, I'm interested in that. And as you said, is always, always amazing, because what Taylor and I started out to do was not what we ended up doing. The story changed and had many twists and turns.
Well, talking about that, yeah, how did you find out about this story, Judy?
Actually, Taylor did, and she should probably tell you that.
Okay.
I have written 2 other books about our nation's POWs. And so over the last 20 years, I've amassed quite a bit of research on them and have gotten to know many of their families. And I knew a little bit, having read some of the biographies, about the work of these women during the Vietnam War. I did not know about the impact of their work, how they really changed U.S. policy. And about 9 years ago, I got a call from one of the former POWs, Captain Dick Stratton. And he's a pretty notorious one, very famous. And he called me and he said, there's been so much written about us, but much less about what our wives went through, what they accomplished. And I think there needs to be a book about it, and I think you should write it. And I said, well, I saluted and said, Yes, sir, Captain, I'll get right on that. And I started doing the research and realized it was pretty voluminous. And so I recruited my friend Judy to partner with me on it.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, and you mentioned that it was not the project you started with. So how did that morph? What changed there?
First of all, this was incredibly difficult for some of the women to talk about, to relive a time that was painful. We wanted to include wives who were reunited with their husbands. We wanted to include real life women whose lives did not work out the way they expected it to, either through divorce or through the challenges of what we now know as PTSD, or even those MIA wives whose husbands did not return, or KIA. And we thought real life was important. And unpeeling those layers was the hardest part, because you're taking a bunch of women who are aged between 77 and 92 now and asking them to talk to you via technology and let us record it. And that led to some funny intervals. And then, oh, by the way, can you talk about the most revealing, most difficult, most pushed down moments in your life that are still fraught with pain and tinged with sadness? And some said no. And then we had to make sure that they were able to handle the questions and that they were able to find photos and dig up some of the research. Everybody had papers. Not everybody could access them. And then we wanted some discerning qualities between them so that it wasn't just the retelling of similar stories. And so, yeah, that was some of what we encountered. And then, of course, clips were becoming available on television and internet that while we were writing it. So it was really fascinating to watch some of these interviews from the 1960s with Dan Rather or...
Wow.
But I think what we did realize was how important the work was, the sheer national and international impact of their work. I mean, before the Vietnam War, we just left our missing. We have 72,000 missing men from World War II.
And I don't think people realize that. Yeah.
And we have more than 7,000 missing from the Korean War. And government policy dictated that within a year of the cessation of hostilities, we just unilaterally declared all those missing men dead. Okay, that changed during the Vietnam War because of the work these women initiated. They made the fate of the missing and captive men an absolute national priority. Such that the Paris peace negotiators were told by President Nixon, I want you to focus only on the POWs. And at the end of the war, the wives said, there needs to be a continued work to find out what happened to our missing. We got our POWs home, but we still have 2,500 missing men. They forced the U.S. government. To form a permanent government agency that now combs the globe year-round looking for remains from all wars. And I'm sure you've read the headlines where a family answers the door and there's a government official saying, we have remains that we have uncovered and are repatriating of your grandfather or great uncle who died in World War II 80 years ago. That is not uncommon. And it is because of the work these women started.
That's so incredible. When we were stationed in Hawaii, we were there, I think it's called JPAC, where they were still going into Asia in the countries, from Korea and Vietnam. And so we were able to, because my husband was in leadership there, go tour that and just see the work they were doing. And before that, I think I had known about POWs, but I didn't really realize that they were so actively looking, and they'd get tips from villagers or just like, we found this site and we found these bones or whatever. And they just immediately send a team. And I thought I had no idea. So this was a few years back, and you're thinking, this is decades and decades ago, and yet here we are still looking. And so to make that connection from that to these wives, I did not know that. And so I think that's amazing.
It's one of the reasons we say it's a quintessentially American story. It's our ethic to not leave anyone behind and to find out what happened to them. The other thing that was so interesting about the story is I grew up, I'm a few years older than Taylor, reading Life magazine with my mother and thumbing through it. And it was stunning. It's still stunning to me to see the pictures of women we now know, I now know, were the same pictures I looked at as a young girl. And when I went to summer camp, my counselor sold me a POW bracelet for $2.50. During the research on the book, we found out $2.50 was the price of a movie ticket, and it seemed like a good price at the time. And so more than 5 million were sold. They were wildly popular. Governor Reagan wore one. Sonny and Cher wore one. They were ubiquitous. And today, your listeners will realize many people wear rubber bands, but the origins of those campaigns go back to the POW bracelets, which were engraved with the name of the missing person, the date of loss, the service they were in, and their rank. And nobody could tolerate the fact that this was a real person and they were missing. And just this week, I got an email from someone who attended a talk I did a week ago that said, could you look up my guy for me and see if they came home? She's never taken it off. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. That gives me chills. Yeah.
Wildly popular.
You know that the POW and MIA flag, which flies on every post office around the country, that was started by the women as well. They created that image to remind people, to remind the nation of our commitment to leave no man behind. Federal law, it must fly above every federal building every single day. It is the wives who pushed for that.
Yeah, that's great. And there's always a POW MIA table at every military function. Yes. That was eye-opening to me as a young spouse. You just kind of come in and go, how are we still here? That there's still people missing? That can't be possible. Realizing that it's military wives that made those changes. That's so meaningful because that they had that tenacity and just that passion to try to fix this problem.
Right. And a vision to see this through from the beginnings of personal pain to action to continued policy change. It's amazing.
Right. But I mean, let's face it, Jen, they were fighting for men they loved.
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
It was personal
for their families.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Well, tell us a little bit about how writing a book together worked with all of these mountains of research. Did you have any issues or challenges, or just tell us a little bit about that process, Taylor?
Well, Judy and I live in different cities. So I live in the DC area. She lives in Tampa. Both have, as you know, large concentrations of military, which is an advantage. But working, across the miles is a challenge. So we had to get good at technology, like Zoom and Google Docs. And we also spent a lot of time on the road. I mean, I went to all kinds of presidential libraries, National Archives, Navy Archives, Swarthmore College Peace Collection, the University of Maryland, you name it, to collect research. And then we paid, lots of visits to each other's homes to work on them together.
And, it's not just doing the research, it's triangulating to find out, did people notice the women were in their office? What was the impact on the White House? What was the impact on the State Department? And it wasn't just one single source of a resource. We had to marshal everything we knew from college, from writing, from being a reporter, to really tease out those moments. The other challenge was we both knew from day one that this should be a spellbinding read, that this should be something that's captivating, but it's very sad. And it's tinged with a lot of history. So how could we make it very readable? And that's when the dramatic moments came to be. And there was a day we were in a hotel rooms Taylor was staying in Tampa, and it was fortunately very comfortable. And we took all the chapter names, cut them up, and then reorganized. And we were going to do this non-chronologically because, there's a lot to be said for a linear approach, but a non-linear approach creates suspense. And we had to seize upon the dramatic moments. And we found ourselves going, what would Candy Paris, for example, have been doing when she got to the airport in JFK to fly off to Paris? And I remembered my mother and her compact and snapping it shut, and all those moments that make you relatable as a character, but also that bring the reader right into the action and drop them into the drama. And the cultural touchstones of the 1960s and women changing along the way as their sons' hair got longer and their skirts got shorter, and how they went from ditching their gloves to actually treating legislators without kid gloves because they wanted their moment.
And I just can't even imagine how much information you had to process and then distill down and choose to create the most important moments in the book. That must have just been overwhelming at some point, I'm sure.
It was, and some of them ended up on the cutting room floor, but we spent a lot of time, probably 2 years, just developing the structure, which is basically a series of dramatic scenes, cinematic scenes, where you're dropped into the middle of the action that are organized by themes, not chronologically. So the book goes back and forth in time. It'll give you whiplash. It goes back and forth so much.
Well, we try to avoid that.
Yeah. But we think that it makes a nonfiction book read much more like a novel.
Well, it sounds to me like it would be a really good movie. So maybe that's coming, hopefully.
We're working on it. I actually thought about Blue Bloods a lot, the TV shows, how the family sits down every Sunday night, which is a pretty traditional now. But, what was it like for these families to be at a dinner table with one chair unfilled? And, I summoned the year my mother died into my consciousness to think of them. And so I kept thinking about what was it like for families? And I kept saying to Taylor, this should be a TV show. It really should be a TV show. And I think that guided us very well. And also when you're non-chronological, and I'm not sure this was so crystallized for me in the beginning, but when you're non-chronological, you can show the ramifications of the present, but also, the compass points, if you will, from the past. And so what was the decisions that were being made that led to this situation, and what did that mean for the women? And what it meant was they had to take diplomatic matters into their own hands, and they had to do things that were unthinkable. Women going off to talk to the Paris Peace delegation from a communist country, that was unthought of in 1969.
Well, and there's just so many great moments. So I would love to hear from both of you. It must be hard to choose, but what are some of your favorite moments from the book? Taylor, you can go first.
Well, one of my favorite moments is the story of Carol McCain, who is John McCain's first wife. She received a letter from a Hollywood director who was also a journalist, Francois Chalet. And she at first thought it was a hoax. She received a letter from him saying, I have just returned from a bedside film interview with your husband in Hanoi. And I'd like to share this with you. I'd like to show you this film. Can you meet me in Paris? And she said, absolutely. So she flew by herself to Paris and met with him at a cafe. And he gave her the tape, and he said, you can't sell this tape to anyone. She was going to go home and watch it. And she, wanted to know the condition of her husband. And he told her that, of course, he was quite injured. He was in a body cast. And then she posed a challenge to him, and she said, I have an idea. It's a harebrained one, but I want you to take me with you to Hanoi. I want you to go back, the next time you go back to Hanoi, to film or interview any of the POWs. I would like to go undercover as your assistant. And she spoke a little bit of French, so she said, I could get away with it. I want to do that. And he kind of giggled and he laughed, and he said, well, I'm not sure that they are going to let me get back in. But I thought, what a brave and bold thing to say, that she would go essentially undercover with a journalist into Hanoi because she was so desperate to see her husband in the other.
Wow.
There are many moments like that in the book. So there's enough for a reader to find someone they relate to and hold on to and take you through the war as it progressed.
Well, you mentioned that some of the women that are portrayed in the book are still alive and even travel with you to some of your speaking engagements. So tell us a little bit about them, Judy.
Gosh, they're wonderful. I mean, they're almost like family now. If they don't hear from us with some frequency, they wonder if we're okay, rather than the other way around. The oldest is 92 and sharp as a tack and asking when she can speak with us again. And that's Mrs. Pat Mearns. Pat was a nurse by training, and then she became an airline stewardess. And she loved travel. She grew up near the backlots of Hollywood in Burbank area. And she grew up with the children of extras in Hollywood. and she heard the train whistle as a young girl and knew she wanted to travel. One of her roommates, so they called it hot racking, and I think they still do. One of her many roommates in San Francisco had a brother in Arizona who was serving in the U.S. Air Force. And when she was there on a layover, or knew she would be, she said, I can deliver his birthday present for you. And she said, that's fine. And she saw her future husband dug her toe into the carpet till she wore a hole in it and decided right then she was going to marry him. And sure enough, they did. And not long after. And unfortunately, Art was shot down just shy of his 100 missions when they had plans to move back to the U.S. from Japan, where they were stationed at Yokota Air Base. And it was a very tough time for Pat. And it really tugged at me. Pat goes on to take on letter writing. She was one of the most organized women. We have sheaths of her letters where she's typed out the O's in them because old typewriters used to do that on onion skin paper. Many of the people who traveled with her around the world talk about hearing her tap on her typewriter to write letters and document what she'd been doing. And she kept the pressure up. And even though when Pat went to Washington, D.C., the congressman said, or their aides said, don't you want to talk about dinner? You must be lonely, and did sort of slow motion cat and mouse chases around their desk. Pat would not be derailed. And she actually, although her husband did not come home the way she hoped he would, and it was a tragic story, Pat went on to become one of the first 1,500 nurse practitioners in the state of California, raised her children as a single parent, managed to maintain her sense of humor, and is very proud of the work she did. And we're proud to be her friend.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, what about you, Taylor?
Well, we've really enjoyed taking some of these women on the road with us. Candy Parrish Ellis, we took her to Greenville, South Carolina in August, and she has now become a minor celebrity. Everyone wants her to sign our book as much as they want us to sign our book. She is the widow of an MIA, Chuck Parrish, who was shot down in July of 1968 when she was living here in the Washington, D.C. area and was the mother of a 3-week-old son. She suspected pretty early on that he might not have survived the crash. She received a personal telegram from the Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme, who told her that her husband had never been on the list of any POWs held in North Vietnam. She worked tirelessly to get that telegram from the Prime Minister, as well as some of the anti-war activists told her that her husband was never on a list. And so it's pretty sure early on that he probably did not survive the crash. And sure enough, when her husband's backseater came home in 1973, he confirmed for her that he died during the crash. He was never able to eject. She was on the cover of Look magazine. She's a doppelganger for Twiggy. And she did marry again and had 2 more children. And she too has just been shocked at the interest and attention that she is getting 50 years later.
She was one of the youngsters in our story. So it's been a lot of fun to get to know them and to be inspired by them, and not just be the dispassionate reporter, but to really say, I wonder if I would have done that. I wonder if I could. And that's the point of the story, I think, is for people to question themselves and build their resilience and say, if there's something I feel really strongly about, I'm going to stick with it. Mm-hmm. It's very inspiring.
I can't imagine there's no way that you couldn't feel personal about this story, it sounds like, especially coming from military backgrounds like you both did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's one other woman in our book, Jen, if I might, I'd like to bring her up. I mean, it's hard to pick just one. Alice Stratton, the wife of Captain Dick Stratton, who approached Taylor about writing the book. Alice is still alive, also close to 92 and a half, lives in Florida. And when the war started and her husband disappeared, she wasn't really sure where Vietnam was. She was working as a social worker, and she was very good at it. And she was the mother of 3 little boys, but she had no reason to believe that Dick would ever get into any kind of trouble. So this hit her very hard. And her evolution from, just being absolutely felled by the news to picking herself up by the bootstraps propelled her to help other families, military families, get through deployments. And she eventually was named in 1985 by President Reagan to be the first female Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Family Matters. We think the first in that job in any service based on what we could find. And she persevered on behalf of single parents, both male and female, co-locating couples, and dealing with a host of issues that faced military families and providing resources to military families. And it's Alice Stratton whom we have to thank as we head toward, the end of a year where there may be conflicts around the world that people may be deploying to.
Yeah. And already have. I'm hearing from a lot of people they're already there. And there's just so many amazing moments and lessons in your book and so many takeaways. But overall, for military spouses today, since we're touching on that a little bit with deployments, what would you like them to take away from this book? What do you think they can get out of this or learn, Taylor?
Well, I would say, don't be afraid to speak up and speak out. Military spouses today are lucky in that they have a lot more tools at their disposal. I mean, women in the 1960s had a phone book and a telephone and postage stamps. Those were their tools. Today, military spouses have 24-hour news and social media and phone trees and email threads and text chains. They have a lot more communications tools at their disposal. And there's also just a lot more, I would say, tolerance from the government for military spouses to speak up. But I would encourage them, squeaky gate gets greased. Don't be afraid.
Yeah. What about you, Judy?
It's also the sense of community that these women didn't even know who else was in the same situation they were in. Some of their first meetings were furtive. They would clink their glasses just in case the house was bugged. This was the Cold War era. So people thought about spies. They didn't know if they were doing something that was really untoward or if it would hurt their husband.
Right.
But today, you can really rely on the military community and those who support the military community. When I first joined the reserves, everybody asked me why in my civilian job. And then when 9/11 happened, everyone said, how do I get in? And what made you think of doing this? Or did you know in college? And I think it's the sense of community and the history that kept me there. And history sometimes tells us that those who shake up and speak out and persist and are relentless will actually work for change. In fact, Jen, we gave this a talk to the survivors of 9/11, the families, and they don't have the same sense of community. They are building one. They don't have the same sense of, they don't have the same resources and benefits. And it's almost as if to a person, they said, it's as if you're telling our story. We can't let this happen. And I can't help but think about the POW families in Israel right now. They're not really prisoners of war, but in a sense they are. They're not combatants, but they're hostages. And those families, Taylor and I were just talking about it yesterday, those families are probably in inexorable pain.
I can't even
thinking
imagine.
About, will they ever see their loved one again? And I have found myself flipping through the stories again and thinking, is there any tidbit we could offer, some morsel of comfort? And it is that you're part of a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's such an important story to keep retelling and not forget because these things just keep repeating.
Oh, yes.
Unfortunately. Well, I think that we've already decided you should have a movie and they should have a statue. So we've got
Thank you.
So other than that we've just decided on, what do you guys have coming next with the book and with what you're doing and speaking?
Well, we do have a website where all of our upcoming events are listed. Our website is unwaveringbook.com. WAVERING book.com. We have an event at the University Club in Washington, D.C. on November 15th. It's a Meet the Authors night, and that is That is free and open to the public. And we will be in Jacksonville, actually like Neptune Beach area, Atlantic Beach area on December 5th.
Yeah.
At the Bookmark, right, Judy? Bookmark?
Yes. Well, and yes, which is a bookstore. We have a number of events, Jen. Our website will be updated shortly. We also have a book trailer there that we put together. We are available to give talks. We are pursuing the idea of dramatizing this in another medium.
Yeah.
But and we're open to offers, but we do love talking with military families. So your readers and listeners should know that we are available.
Awesome. Well, I think I got your website wrong at the beginning. So unwaveringbook.com. Yes,
That's correct.
Yes, that's where you need to connect. Well, before we close, is there anything else you wanted to add that maybe we didn't get to, Taylor?
No, I don't think so. You covered it all.
How about you, Judy?
You know, if you know someone or you love history or the 1960s, women's history, or anything connected to the military, this is a good book to read and to pass along to someone you love.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It was really great to hear some of the behind the scenes and learn more about this incredible book. So I thank you both for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
And listeners, remember, you can find out more at unwaveringbook.com and on social media as @unwaveringbook. So you can learn more about the book and their upcoming speaking engagements and all the behind the scenes there. So make sure and connect there. So military spouses, wherever in the world this finds you and whatever you have going on, remember, you are brave, you are strong, and you've got this. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the MilSpouse Matters podcast. You can connect with me at jen-mcdonald.com or on social media as @MilSpouseMatters. You can find even more military life support with my books, You Are Not Alone, Encouragement for the Heart of a Military Spouse, and MilSpouse Matters, Sharing Strength Through Our Stories, as well as my other podcast, The Christian MilSpouse. Love the show? Please subscribe and leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening, and then share it with someone else who could use it too. Until next time, have a great week.